the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Thursday. We invite you to join in the conversation as we're going to take a look, and we haven't done this in a couple of weeks, where we stand on the impeachment proceedings. And you may say, Nick, oh, geez, I'm tired of it. And, you know, it's crazy. As long, whether, you know, whatever side of this you fall down on an impeachment, it has been going on. And it's some people eat it up and have been watching it, and it's been getting good ratings on a lot of the cable programs, okay? But on the other hand, it's real easy to get lost in some of the minutia, and at some point folks have made up their mind one way or the other anyway. But where do we stand? Here's the thing. It's moving forward as we embark upon the holidays, and we're going to talk about that. We'll open up the phone lines. If you want to join with what you've heard, my take on this is, for a lot of folks that are President Trump supporters, it's not going to make a difference. For those who didn't like him in the first place, sure, it's not going to change their minds. They felt that way all along. The big question, if there's a sliver of folks in the middle who maybe voted for the president last time, and this time, based on this development, will say, I don't think I can do it again. Is that big a deal? I don't know. What do you think? 737-7587. So in addition to talking about where we stand on the impeachment, I want to talk about with our guest this morning how it may affect the upcoming presidential election, for better or for worse, for either side. And to talk on that, John Vile from MTSU. Good morning to you,
Good
sir.
to be here.
You're invigorated, I can tell. Because
I am.
This is, John was saying, like a lot of folks out there who are into this, and certainly he is as a scholar, watching hour and hour at home, and finally your wife said, honey, no more. Right?
I'm not sure she used the word honey. But
turn that off. Let's go to something else. My wife is the same way. She's the same way. But you and I mean, now I'll be honest, I have not been able, because of my schedule here at work, or watched as much as I would have liked. I know you followed it closely. So before we get to the phone lines, and they are open, 737-7587, I'm just looking for opinions here, so we know where we stand today. The Judiciary Committee convenes today. The members who gave opening statements last night will consider amendments today. And I guess there's two articles of impeachment, correct?
Yes, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. And they're fairly broad. I mean, they have sort of some subpoints, but
okay. And they convene at around 9 a.m. this morning. We expect, while maybe there will be 1, 2, 3 Democrats that maybe abstain or don't vote, that they likely will approve or go to a vote sometime maybe later today.
Probably party line. It doesn't look like any of the Republicans, at least on the committee, are going to peel off. All
right. So if the committee approves the articles, they'll send them to the House floor for a vote next week, which could then, depending on the outcome of that vote, make President Trump the third in U.S. history to be impeached.
Right, and really 4 have been involved. We got fairly close with Nixon. They hadn't actually, the full House had not voted on articles, but articles of impeachment had been written up. So, but 3 that were, yes, if this is successful, would have actually been impeached.
All right. So for each amendment, I guess today members have a right to speak up for up to 5 minutes each. Think we'll have more of that going on
I
today?
think we'll see a lot of drama today.
Okay.
You know, one of the fascinating things, particularly about the testimonial phase, not so much last night, but you saw a lot of posturing, a lot of speeches of Republicans have, I don't know if I would say they have conceded the facts, but they don't seem to be arguing so much about what actually happened as to whether the president's getting a fair procedural shake.
Right.
You know, there's an old saying in law that, you know, if the facts are against you, you argue the law. If the law's against you, you argue the facts. And you got both sides are sort of falling into that routine.
And that's where it can get confusing for some as you tune in and listen on NPR and you hear arguments on both sides. Now, all right, as far as I can tell, of course, this is partisan in a lot of ways. We'll be curious to see if some cross one way or the other, but partisan. So I think it's a given that the president will be impeached next week. I mean, there's the Democratic votes in there. It will likely happen. Now, we need to be clear on this, and some people who don't pay attention. If he's impeached, what happens next?
Right. Impeachment is like the indictment stage, sort of the grand jury stage in a trial.
Right.
You've been formally accused of a crime. The trial in the Senate decides whether you're convicted or exonerated. If you are convicted, you're removed from office. And you may or may not, depending on what the Senate would decide, you may or may not be barred from further office.
Okay.
But they are the only direct penalties that are a result of conviction for impeachment.
Well, let's go to the most recent impeachment effort prior to this one, that involving President Clinton.
Yes.
Okay, he was impeached by what was a Republican House.
Yes.
It went to what was a Democratic Senate. And what did they do? At that point, when they held that vote in the Senate, was this to acquit, or was this just to dismiss the charges against him? Do you recall one or the other?
I believe you actually vote on the charges, and my recollection was that they split on the charges. There were a couple where there was actually a majority of the Senate that voted to convict, but it requires a 2/3 majority.
Okay, so
and this was particularly important in the case of a Tennessee president. Andrew Johnson, who was the first president to be impeached, the Senate actually fell a single vote shy of the necessary 2/3 vote. And if anybody remembers John Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, he actually praised those who voted against their own party because he did not think it was an impeachable offense. There have been some people who have said, well, no, Johnson really was trying to obstruct congressional reconstruction. His firing of Secretary of War Stanton probably wasn't an impeachable ground but there were certainly others that one could have accepted.
So there's never been a president fully removed through the entire impeachment process in the House and the Senate. I think had President Nixon stayed, he would have been gone. So he would have been the one, and I think he saw the writing on the wall, then he arranged for his pardon.
And actually, what's different here is that key members of the Senate, including Barry Goldwater, had a private conversation, and the president said, well, where do you think we are? And he said, Mr. President, in truth, I have to tell you, even I couldn't vote for you.
Right.
And so the writing was, but now, we should make clear, impeachment is not limited to presidents. It's more commonly used for judges. Okay. And there have actually been over a dozen or so judges. Now, there's only been one Supreme Court justice, Samuel Chase, who was impeached, not convicted. There have been a number of federal judges who have been not only impeached but removed from office.
Okay, so if the House does impeach next week, then I assume the Senate will set up its trial or whatever sometime in the new year, probably,
yes.
Correct? Now, and clarify this for me, because I'm seeing that, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is the one who will call that, hold a final vote. And what we're hearing from a couple of Republican lawmakers is that it'll be a final vote to acquit President Trump should he be impeached, when a majority of the senators believe his trial has run its course, instead of holding a vote on dismissing the impeachment. So they have those options, right? I mean, they could just dismiss it and say, all right, we're holding a vote, let's just dismiss it. It's not going to happen. But they could take the added step of acquitting him. Do you understand? Is there a distinction there? And is that a big deal?
I'm not sure that there is.
Okay.
I mean, I think
once you think an acquittal is like clearing him of the charges.
House is going to actually represent you from a House is actually going to go to the Senate, present these. Now, one thing that's interesting, and we know this from the Clinton administration, when there's an impeachment of the president, the person presiding is the Chief Justice of the United States. So John Roberts will be presiding over this.
Okay.
But it does sound like, for the most part, the big question now is, are they going to make a full trial of it, or are they basically going to, these are the charges, let the House tell us why they think the charges are real, then let somebody rebut them, then take the vote.
Right.
It doesn't sound like, although Trump has indicated he'd like to call in Joe Biden's son and a couple other people, but I think the Republican senators think that the fewer witnesses you have, probably the less chance you have for things to go off the rails.
Okay, so I think the two of us are kind of in agreement as we go to break that it appears as though, based on partisanship as it goes, that the president will be impeached next week by the House.
Yes.
And I believe it'll go to the Senate in the new year, and at that point, either the charges will be dismissed or they will vote to acquit the president. And thus, that's kind of the end of it, except then you wonder, what impact does all of this have? Certainly a lot of dirty laundry perhaps on both sides, has been aired over the past several weeks, and how that plays on the voters in what is an election year, which makes this unique that there's an impeachment just before an election. And the question comes into play. I don't believe it's changing the opinion of any of the president's hardcore, base support, and same for those who, vigorously, oppose him. The question is, could it have an impact on the election in the middle ground there? And there are people on the middle ground. So we'll take a break. 737-7587. If you have a thought or an opinion, we'd love to hear from you. If you're on hold, stay there. But what do you think? Whether it changed your mind in any way, and if not, do you think it could have an impact, positive or negative, on the president's re-election effort? So we'll take a break and be back with much more with our good friend here, as well as something going on in Great Britain. Right.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, touch on.